That sentence was not spoken in alarm. It was not a warning issue to generate attention or concern. It was a scientific statement of fact, delivered with the precision of a researcher who has spent a career studying atmospheric dynamics and who, faced with the data that 2026 has produced, reached for the most accurate language available. We have never experienced this before. Not the individual events. Some of them have precedence in the geological record. In the deep past, before humans built cities or kept instrumental temperature records or counted flood deaths. But this specific combination, El Niño of this potential magnitude on top of a global temperature baseline this high, generating the sequence of events that has played out across every inhabited continent between January and August of 2026. There is no historical analog. There is no record from the instrumental era, which extends back roughly 170 years for surface temperature measurements and somewhat less for other variables, that captures the same convergence of conditions. The people who study this for a living are saying so directly in peer-reviewed papers and in interviews and in official statements from institutions like Copernicus, NOAA, the World Meteorological Organization, and Imperial College, London's World Weather Attribution Group, and the El Niño that is building in the Pacific, the one that all of these scientists say will deliver its maximum atmospheric impact in the November through January window, has not yet peaked. The weather has reached a point that no one alive has ever seen. This video is going to walk through every element of the evidence that supports that statement, explain the single physical mechanism that connects all of it, and be honest about what comes next. Start at the beginning of the year, January 2026, La Niña, the cooling phase of the ELS. Niño, southern oscillation, the period of anomalously cool sea surface temperatures in the central and eastern Pacific, was still in effect. La Niña is a moderating influence. It is supposed to reduce, not eliminate, but reduce the tendency toward record-breaking heat across many regions. The climate system, even under climate change, does not produce its extreme events at maximum intensity every year. La Niña years tend to be cooler than El Niño years. That is what decades of observational data show. In January, a record-setting heat dome enveloped Australia, sending temperatures near 50 degrees Celsius while heat and catastrophic wildfires gripped parts of South America, setting remote parts of Argentina's Patagonia ablaze and killing 21 people in coastal towns in Chile. In addition, South Africa was experiencing its worst wildfires in years, near 50 degrees Celsius. In Australia, in January 2026, under La Niña, the cooling phase of the Pacific Oscillation, in a year that was still in the post-maximum phase of the El Niño Southern Oscillation cycle, before the El Niño of late 2026 had even begun to develop. Theodore Keeping, climate scientist at Imperial College London and the international research collaboration World Weather Attribution, who specializes in research on wildfires and extreme heat, said, "This means the effect of human-caused climate change is overwhelming natural variability." Overwhelming natural variability, the thing that La Niña is supposed to provide, a natural dampening effect on global temperature extremes, was not sufficient in January 2026 to prevent record-breaking heat domes over Australia and catastrophic fire conditions across Chile and Argentina. The human-caused warming signal has grown large enough that it dominates even when the natural oscillation is pushing in the opposite direction. La Niña could no longer provide the kind of genuine cooling that it provided in earlier decades, because the baseline it is cooling from is so much higher than the baseline it was cooling from in the 1990s or 2000s. By April, the fire picture had crystallized from individual national disasters into a global statistic. Fires from January to April have already caused unprecedented levels of damage, burning more than 150 million hectares of land, 20% more than the previous record, according to data compiled by World Weather Attribution. The scientists said we could be heading towards an unprecedented year of global fire and record-breaking weather events. This is 50% higher than the recent wildfire average and double the amount burned in 2024, 150 million hectares. In 4 months, 20% above the previous all-time record, double the 2024 total, and double the 2024 total matters specifically because 2024 was itself a record year for global fire activity, a year that produced the catastrophic Canadian wildfire season, the Siberian fire season, the Greek and Southern European fires. Doubling that total by April of the following year, while still under La Niña's moderating influence, is the kind of data point that requires scientists to reach for new language. Friederike Otto, climate scientist at Imperial College London and co-founder of World Weather Attribution, said, "If there is a strong El Niño later this year, there is a serious risk that the effect of climate change and El Niño will result in unprecedented weather extremes." Unprecedented, the word that appears in the headline of the May 12th Reuters story. Not severe, not extreme, not record-breaking. Unprecedented. meaning without precedent, meaning outside the range of what has previously occurred in the observational record, meaning something that the data from the instrumental era cannot provide a comparison case for. Now the ocean. Because the ocean is where the physical driver of everything happening in 2026 is most directly measured. Record-breaking heat waves are even stunning scientists monitoring the acceleration of climate change. Bloomberg's July 2026 climate analysis, a comprehensive review of the year's extreme weather data, used the specific phrasing, even stunning scientists. Not the public, not politicians, scientists. The people who spend their professional lives building models of how the atmosphere and ocean interact, who have seen the trend lines building for decades, who have been warning about exactly this trajectory for their entire careers. They are being stunned by the pace of what they are now observing. That is the signal that the pace has exceeded even the projections of those doing the projecting. In June 2026, the Copernicus Marine Service released its monthly Global Ocean Report. The number that appeared in it, 21.0 degrees Celsius for global average sea surface temperature, was the highest ever recorded for the month of June in the entire observational era. The previous June records had been set in 2023 and 2024, consecutive years of record ocean warmth. Each new June record was higher than the last. 2026 broke 2024's record. And the Mediterranean Sea, whose 24.3 degrees Celsius average in June was itself a record for that basin, is providing the atmospheric moisture that fueled the European heatwave sequence and the Spanish and French wildfire disaster simultaneously. Carlo Buontempo, director of the Copernicus Climate Change Service, once said, "Current conditions could indicate the beginning of a new phase, leading once more to uncharted territory." A new phase, uncharted territory. The director of the European Union's primary climate monitoring service, in his official capacity representing one of the world's most credible scientific institutions, choosing the phrase uncharted territory, not as rhetoric, but as a technical description. When conditions move outside the range of what the observational record contains, the models built on that record are extrapolating rather than interpolating. They are making educated projections about a regime that has never been directly observed. Uncharted territory means exactly that. The chart does not go this far. The instruments are working. The data is being recorded. But the territory the data is describing is new. Now Europe. Because what happened in Europe between May and July 2026 is the most concentrated sequence of heat-related extremes in the modern record for that continent. And it happened on a schedule that moved earlier, hit harder, and lasted longer than any comparable period that European climate scientists had previously documented. In May 2026, England broke its all-time May temperature record, then broke it again 2 days later. The record for the month of May across the entire instrumental record for England, a record extending back over a century, was broken twice in the same week. In June, the UK Met Office issued a red extreme heat warning, its highest possible level, reserved for conditions that carry a risk to life for the entire healthy population, not just vulnerable groups. The temperature at Lingwood in Norfolk reached 37.7 degrees Celsius, a new all-time record for the Mont d'Ah of June in the United Kingdom, the sixth highest temperature ever recorded in Britain in any month. The dew points during this event, reaching 22 degrees Celsius in some locations, and were higher than during the 2022 heat wave that produced the UK's all-time record of 40.3 degrees. More humid, more oppressive, more physiologically dangerous, despite reaching temperatures several degrees below the 2022 peak. Tim Lenton, chair in climate change and earth system science at the University of Exeter, said, "We could call them super extremes or mega extremes. Super extremes, mega extremes. A climate scientist at a leading university reaching for new vocabulary because the existing vocabulary, record-breaking, extreme, severe, no longer adequately captures what is being observed. The events of 2026 are not simply at the high end of a distribution that was already known. They are redefining the shape of the distribution itself." By July, Europe had experienced 3 separate heatwave events within the UK before mid-month, something with no modern precedent in British meteorological records. Spain and Portugal saw temperatures above 46 degrees Celsius. France had approximately 30 fires burning simultaneously in the Gironde department, advancing toward the suburbs of Bordeaux. 300,000 people were displaced across France and Spain simultaneously. Italy saw 400 tourists rescued from a fire by sea because the land route was cut off. And the estimated European death toll from the June heat event alone, compiled by New Scientist, was approximately 20,000 people across the continent. Dr. Daniel Swain of the California Institute for Water Resources said, Strong El Niño events, even on their own without global warming, cause regional to continental disruption in precipitation patterns, and so increase the risk of floods. This effect will be amplified considerably by the now nearly 1.5 degrees C of global warming experienced as of 2026. Now America. Because the European heat story was not the only continent-scale extreme weather disaster of 2026. While Europe was burning and flooding and setting temperature records, the United States was producing a flash flood emergency season with no modern parallel. The total of flash flood emergencies issued in the United States through July 21st, 2026 was 32. 15 of those, nearly half of the entire year's total, were issued in just 2 weeks in July. Not 2 months, 2 weeks. Texas experienced a 1,000-year rainfall event between July 15th and 17th. A rainfall event so extreme that its statistical probability in any given year is 1/10 of 1%. It was the second consecutive year that a flood of that statistical rarity struck the Texas Hill Country. The Sand Run stream gauge near Buchanan, West Virginia, hit major flood stage on July 21st for the first time in its recorded history. Not the first time in decades, not the first time in the gauges. Modern digital era, the first time ever. West Virginia's governor declared a state of emergency for all 55 counties simultaneously. And the National Weather Service's flash flood emergency designation, the highest level flood alert in the system's vocabulary, was issued at a rate approaching a monthly record for any single month in the agency's history. The compound nature of what 2026's weather has produced is the detail that scientists are reaching for phrases like no historical analog and uncharted territory. Each individual event in isolation is extraordinary. Taken together, they constitute something categorically different from anything the climate monitoring infrastructure has cataloged across its operational history. Dr. Swain said, "In modern human history, we've never experienced a strong or very strong El Niño event amid pre-existing conditions that were this warm globally. Therefore, it would not be surprising to see some unprecedented global impacts by later in 2026 into 2027 in terms of flood, drought, and wildfire-related extremes." This is the sentence that connects all 4 of the year's disaster threads: the fires, the ocean heat, the European summer, the American floods. Each one extraordinary in isolation, each one connected through the same physical mechanism to a condition that has never existed before in the modern observational era: a strong El Niño developing on top of the warmest baseline global temperature in the 170-year instrumental record. The mechanism works like this. El Niño releases heat from the Pacific Ocean into the atmosphere, raising global average temperatures by between 0.2 and 0.5 degrees Celsius above the underlying trend during its peak in the year that follows. When the underlying trend is at the levels it was at in the mid-20th century, roughly 0.5 degrees above pre-industrial, an El Niño of the current potential magnitude adds its boost to produce years of moderate global record temperatures. When the underlying trend is at current levels, approximately 1.5 degrees above pre-industrial, as Swain specifies, the same El Niño boost produces something categorically different. The baseline is already producing record-breaking conditions in the absence of El Niño. Add the El Niño signal on top of that baseline, and you are in territory that the historical record contains no analog for. This is not an argument about whether the underlying warming is human-caused. The scientific consensus on that question has not changed and is not in serious dispute among climate researchers. This is a description of the physical consequence of stacking a strong natural amplification signal on top of an already record baseline. The El Niño does not care about the cause of the baseline, temperature. It amplifies whatever baseline it finds. In 2026, the baseline it found is the warmest in recorded history, and the El Niño has not yet peaked. The scientists said records will continue to break, and extreme weather will worsen until the world drastically cuts fossil fuel use and reaches net zero emissions. Worsens, not stabilizes, not plateaus, worsens. The trajectory that the 2026 events are expressing: 3 UK heat waves before mid-July in a country where 1 heat wave before August was historically unusual. 150 million hectares burned in 4 months against a recent average of 100 million for a full year. A second consecutive 1,000-year flood in the same Texas watershed is not a set of isolated unlucky events. It is the observable expression of a physics that is not going to reverse course on any timescale that matters to the people alive today. Each additional degree of warming makes these events more frequent, more intense, and more geographically widespread. Each year's baseline is higher than the year before. Each El Niño that develops on top of that higher baseline reaches into territory that the previous El Niño could not reach. Now what comes next? Because the El Niño that has provided the atmospheric backdrop for 2026's record-breaking sequence has not yet delivered its maximum atmospheric impact. The scientists said we could be heading towards an unprecedented year of global fire and record-breaking weather events. Records will continue to break, and extreme weather will worsen. The El Niño peak is forecast by NOAA and the ECMWF to arrive in the November through January window. The atmospheric temperature effect of a major El Niño, the way it translates from oceanic warming to the global air temperature record, typically lags the oceanic peak by approximately 6 to 12 months. The 1997 or 98 El Niño peaked oceanically in late 1997 and drove global temperature records in 1998. The 2015-16 El Niño peaked in late 2015 and drove global temperature records in 2016. The 2026 El Niño, projected to peak November through January at anomaly levels that could approach or exceed either of those previous events on a warmer baseline, will deliver its maximum atmospheric temperature signature in 2027. The Met Office's published annual forecast gave an 86% probability that at least one year between 2026 and 2030 will be the warmest year on record globally. The single most likely candidate for that year, given the El Niño timing, is 2027. This is what the phrase, "the worst is still ahead," means when scientists say it about 2026. Not that 2026's events will be exceeded tomorrow or next week, but that the physical sequence that has been playing out since January, fires, ocean heat, European summer catastrophe, American flood emergencies, is not the full expression of the El Niño's influence. The oceanic warming that is currently sitting at subsurface depths in the central and eastern Pacific, still rising toward the surface, still building toward the November peak, its atmospheric fingerprint has not yet been full. I delivered to the global circulation that determines what November's weather look as like in the Sahel, in Australia, in the eastern United States. Dr. Jamila Mahmood, Executive Director of Sunway Center for Planetary Health, said, "It highlights how rapidly we are now approaching the boundary conditions where ecosystems and human societies face existential threats, even in places thought to be safe." Even in places thought to be safe. That phrase is the one that makes 2026's disaster geography specifically notable beyond the individual death tolls and evacuation orders. Australia, near 50 degrees during La Niña. Texas, experiencing a 1,000-year flood twice in a row. The UK, a temperate, maritime, famously moderate climate, issuing its highest possible heat warning in June and experiencing 3 separate declared heatwave events before mid-July. Canada simultaneously burning with 950 active wildfires. These are not regions historically associated with the extreme end of the global climate risk spectrum. They are places that their own populations and governments have historically treated as relatively insulated from the most severe climate impacts. That insulation has dissolved. The Bloomberg analysis, published in July 2026, described the situation in language that is worth quoting in full for its precision. Record-breaking heat waves are even stunning scientists monitoring the acceleration of climate change. Even stunning scientists. The people for whom watching records fall is professional routine, for whom the trend line is the background of every working day, for whom the language of climate risk has been a daily vocabulary for decades. They are being stunned, not by the fact that records are being broken. They expected records to be broken, by the pace, by the specific magnitude, by the geographic reach, by the convergence of multiple record-breaking events across multiple continents in the same season of the same year in a way that no model built on historical data had fully captured. The weather has reached a point that no one alive has ever seen. That is not a rhetorical formulation. It is a scientific description of a condition documented across every major observational system. Satellite, surface station, ocean buoy, atmospheric sonde that monitors Earth's physical state. The global ocean at 21 degrees Celsius in June, 150 million hectares burned by April, 3 UK heat waves before July 15th, 32 US flash flood emergencies in 7 months. A second consecutive 1,000-year flood in the same Texas watershed. 267,000 people evacuated in Japan on top of a heat emergency that was already severe before the earthquake added power outages and ruptured water mains to it. The El Niño that Dr. Swain describes as having no historical precedent in this temperature context is still building. Its peak is still months away. The atmospheric impacts of its maximum will extend into 2027. The baseline on which its impacts will be felt is still the warmest in the instrumental record and is, each month, setting new monthly records.